My girlfriend's wealthy parents hated me before we'd even met. On my way to their mansion for the first time, I stopped to fix an old woman's vintage Rolls-Royce on the side of the road. I arrived an hour late, covered in grease, ready for them to throw me out. And then, the woman I had just helped pulled up behind me. Before we get into it, I have a question. What's the most stressful meet-the-parents moment you've ever had or heard of? Let me know in the comments. And be sure to subscribe for more stories every day. Okay, let's head out to that lonely country road. The phone call with my girlfriend, Sophia, was supposed to be a final, reassuring pep talk. Instead, it was a masterclass in anxiety. I was standing in my small apartment, already sweating in my best, and only, suit, and her voice on the other end was a tight, frantic whisper. "Okay, Mark, just remember the plan," she said. "When my father asks what you do not say you own a garage. You say you are in specialized automotive management. And if my mother asks about your hands, you tell her you've been doing some recreational woodworking. Whatever you do not mention the words engine oil or transmission fluid." "Sophia, honey," I said, trying to make a joke of it, "I am a mechanic. It's what I do. It's who I am. I built my business from the ground up. I'm proud of it." "I know you are," she whispered, and I could hear the genuine pain in her voice. "And I'm proud of you. But they're different. They come from a different world. They won't understand. Just for me, Mark, just for tonight, can you please just play the part?" I sighed. I would do anything for Sophia. And that included pretending to be a man I was not for a few hours to impress her insufferably snobby parents, Richard and Eleanor Prescott. I had never met them, but I had heard the stories. Stories of their country club memberships, their charity galas, their quiet but absolute judgment of anyone who didn't fit into their narrow, old-money world. And I, a blue-collar guy who had grease under his fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could ever fully remove, was the walking embodiment of everything they disdained. I spent 10 minutes scrubbing my hands with a stiff, bristled brush until they were red and raw, a futile attempt to erase the evidence of my life's work. I got into my meticulously clean vintage pickup truck, a vehicle I had restored with my own two hands, and started the long drive out of the city and into their world. The further I drove, the more the landscape changed. Grimy city blocks gave way to sprawling suburbs, which then melted into vast, rolling hills of pristine horse country. The road narrowed, and soon I was driving past massive gated estates, each one a fortress of wealth and privilege. I checked my watch. I was actually going to be a few minutes early. A small, manageable victory. And then, as I rounded a long, sweeping curve, I saw it. It was a car. But it wasn't just a car. It was a work of art. A magnificent, two-toned 1960s Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud, parked awkwardly on the gravel shoulder, its great silver hood propped open. Standing beside it, looking utterly and completely helpless, was an elderly woman. She was the picture of elegance, dressed in tweed jacket and pearls, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. She was staring at the silent, smoking engine with a look of profound, aristocratic frustration. My mind immediately started racing. "Keep driving," a voice that sounded suspiciously like Sophia's whispered in my head. "You can't be late. Not today. This is not your problem." But another deeper voice, the voice of the man I actually was, took over. That was a classic, a masterpiece, and it was in trouble. And the woman looked like she was about to have a very bad day. With a groan of resignation at my own character, I slowed my truck and pulled over in front of her. I got out, leaving my suit jacket on the seat. "Trouble, ma'am?" I asked, trying to sound as non-threatening as possible. She looked at me, her eyes sharp and intelligent, taking in my suit pants and dress shirt with a hint of surprise. "It just stopped," she said, her voice a crisp, cultured tone. "Made a rather dreadful clunking sound and then a great deal of smoke. My driver was supposed to follow me, but he seems to have gotten lost." "Mind if I take a look?" I asked. "I know a thing or two about these old engines." She gave me a long, appraising look, then nodded. "Be my guest." I leaned under the massive hood, the familiar, beautiful scent of hot oil and aged metal filling my senses. To me, this was a symphony. I saw the problem in less than 30 seconds. A frayed wire on the distributor cap, a classic issue with this model. An easy fix, if you knew what you were doing. "It's just a loose connection, ma'am," I told her. "I can have it patched up and running in about 20 minutes, but—" I looked down at my clean hands and my dress shirt. "It's gonna get a little greasy." "Young man," she said, a small, wry smile on her face, "if you can make this beautiful old beast run again, I do not care if you have to cover yourself in mud to do it." And so I went to work. I pulled my small emergency toolkit from my truck. I got my hands dirty. I carefully stripped the wire, reconnected it, and wrapped it securely with electrical tape. We talked as I worked. She didn't ask what I did for a living. She asked me about the car. She was sharp, knowledgeable. She loved this vehicle, and she was genuinely impressed by my expertise. When I was finished, I wiped my greasy hands on a rag from my truck. "Okay, ma'am," I told her. "Try her now." She got in, turned the key, and the great, powerful engine purred to life, a deep, satisfying rumble. She beamed, a genuine, beautiful smile of pure joy. "Young man, you are a miracle worker," she exclaimed. "How can I possibly repay you?" "Just knowing she's running again is all the payment I need," I said, my own heart full. "You have a wonderful day, ma'am." "You as well," she said, her intelligent eyes seeming to hold mine for a long moment. Then, with a final grateful nod, she put the car in gear and drove away, a queen in her newly resurrected chariot. I watched the beautiful old car disappear down the road, a warm feeling of a job well done in my chest. A feeling that immediately turned to ice as I finally looked down at my hands, which were now streaked with black grease, and then at my watch. I was now over an hour and 5 minutes late. The sun was a fiery orange ball sinking below the rolling tree-lined hills. The dinner was supposed to have started at 6. I rehearsed my apology in my head as I drove the final 2 miles to the Prescott estate. "I am so sorry, sir. There was an elderly woman, a real emergency, a classic car." It sounded flimsy, pathetic, like the kind of cheap, unbelievable excuse a schoolboy would invent. These were not the kind of people who would appreciate the nuances of a broken-down vintage automobile. These were people, as Sophia had so carefully explained to me, who valued one thing above all else: appearances. And I, with my greasy hands, my dirt-stained suit pants, and my unforgivable tardiness, was about to make the worst first impression in human history. The entrance to the estate was marked by 2 massive stone pillars, but no gate. It was a statement of quiet, old-money confidence. The driveway, a long, winding river of perfectly white gravel, crunched under my tires. It led through a landscape so perfectly manicured it looked unreal, finally opening up to reveal the house itself. Mansion was the only word for it. It was a sprawling 3-story brick Georgian manor, with dozens of tall, glittering windows, all of them lit from within like a grand, festive cruise ship. I parked my humble, if lovingly restored, pickup truck at the far end of a circular driveway that was already lined with expensive German sedans. I felt like a dinghy tying up next to a fleet of yachts. For a long moment, I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my heart hammering against my ribs. I tried to clean the grease from under my fingernails with a useless paper napkin from the glove box, a futile gesture that only seemed to smear the blackness. This was it. I took a deep, steadying breath, got out of my truck, and began the long, lonely walk to the imposing front door. I rang the bell. The sound echoed, deep and sonorous, somewhere in the vastness of the house. I waited. After what felt like an eternity, the heavy, dark wood door swung open. And there was Sophia. Her face, which I had last seen on a video call, full of a beautiful, anxious hope, was now a mask of pure, horrified shock. "Mark," she whispered,
her eyes wide as they took in my appearance, my disheveled hair, my grease-stained hands, and the dirt on my suit. "Oh my God, what happened to you? Are you okay? I was so worried. I tried calling you." "I'm so sorry, Soph," I began, my own voice a low, apologetic rumble. "I can explain. I was on my way, and there was this old woman on the side of the road. Her car had broken down, and I felt I had to stop and help her. But I never got to finish." Two figures emerged from the grand hallway behind her, stepping into the warm glow of the porch light. It was them. Richard and Eleanor Prescott. They were exactly as Sophia had described them, only more so. He was tall and silver-haired, dressed in a perfectly tailored smoking jacket. His face was a mask of cold, aristocratic disdain. She was impossibly elegant, her pearls gleaming, her expression of bored, chilly disapproval. They looked at their daughter's horrified face, and then they looked at me, and their expressions hardened into something that was beyond simple disapproval. It was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "So," Richard Prescott said, his voice a low, cutting drawl that was as sharp and as cold as a shard of glass, "this is him, the mechanic." "I am so incredibly sorry for my tardiness, Mr. and Mrs. Prescott," I stammered, my carefully rehearsed speech turning to ash in my mouth. "There was a woman on the road, her vintage car had broken down, and I felt I had to stop and help her." Richard held up a hand, silencing me instantly. "We do not care for your excuses, young man. Punctuality in our world is not a suggestion. It is the baseline requirement of respect, a requirement you have clearly failed to meet on this, our very first meeting."
His wife, Eleanor, then stepped forward, her eyes as cold and as hard as her diamond earrings, raking over my appearance with a look of physical disgust. She looked at my greasy hands, and a small, cruel smile touched her lips. "Sophia told us you were a man who works with his hands," she said, her voice dripping with a sweet, venomous disdain. "I see you've made no effort to hide the fact. How charmingly rustic of you." I just stood there, speechless. The double-barreled shotgun blast of their snobbery had left me completely disarmed. "I think it's best if we reschedule this visit, Mark," Richard said, his tone one of a man dismissing a servant. He was not even looking at me anymore. He was looking at his daughter. "Perhaps for a time when your friend can present himself with a modicum of the dignity we expect in this house." He then turned his back on me, a final, absolute act of dismissal. Defeat was a cold, bitter taste in my mouth. I had failed. I had played their game, and I had lost spectacularly. I gave Sophia one last heartbroken look, a silent apology for not being the man her family wanted, and I turned to walk back into the darkness, my future with her feeling as distant and as cold as the stars. But before I could take a single step off the grand, imposing porch, the sound reached me. It was a sound I knew intimately, the deep, beautiful, and profoundly familiar rumble of a classic V12 Rolls-Royce engine. A pair of bright, powerful headlights swept across the manicured lawn, illuminating the four of us in a sudden, dramatic glare. I froze, my hand on the railing, my heart giving a single, hopeful, and utterly confused leap. I knew that sound. I knew that car. The magnificent, two-toned silver cloud glided to a whisper-quiet stop behind my humble pickup truck. For a moment, no one on the porch moved. Richard and Eleanor Prescott stared, their faces a mixture of bewilderment and annoyance at this unexpected interruption of their triumph. Sophia just watched, her earlier despair now tinged with a deep, questioning curiosity. The driver's side door of the Rolls-Royce opened with a soft, satisfying click. A chauffeur, impeccably dressed in a dark suit and cap, stepped out and moved with a practiced, formal grace to open the rear passenger door. A hand emerged first, an elegant, pale hand adorned with a single massive sapphire ring that seemed to drink the light from the porch. Then slowly, regally, the occupant of the car stepped out. It was her. It was the woman from the side of the road. My mother-in-law-to-be was the first to speak, her voice a high-pitched squeak of utter astonishment that completely shattered her cold, controlled facade. "Mother, what are you doing here? And in that old thing? I told you the driver would pick you up in the town car." The woman, Matilda Prescott, Sophia's grandmother and the undeniable, universally feared matriarch of the entire Prescott clan, completely and totally ignored her daughter. Her sharp, intelligent eyes, the same pale blue eyes that had watched me with such curiosity as I worked, scanned the scene before her. They took in the rigid, angry posture of her son-in-law, the flustered, guilty expression of her daughter, Sophia's tear-streaked confusion, and finally my own disheveled, grease-stained form. She began to walk towards the porch, her steps surprisingly brisk and full of a purpose that seemed to make the very air around her crackle. Richard and Eleanor, who just moments ago had been the imperious lords of this manor, now looked like two petulant, scolded children. Matilda Prescott stopped at the bottom of the steps, directly in front of me. Her gaze was direct, unwavering, and held a hint of something I couldn't quite decipher. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering for a moment on my grease-stained hands, the dirt on my knee, the slightly rumpled state of my suit. A lesser man would have wilted under such intense scrutiny, but her gaze didn't feel judgmental. It felt analytical, like a master craftsman examining a piece of unfamiliar but well-made furniture. Then a slow, knowing smile spread across her face, a smile that held a universe of amusement and a great deal of something else I was just beginning to understand: respect. "Richard," she said, her voice strong and clear, cutting through the stunned silence like a well-struck bell. "Eleanor." Her tone brooked no argument. It was a quiet command. "This young man," she gestured towards me with her glittering hand, "who you seem to be in the process of throwing off your property, just spent the better part of an hour lying on the cold, damp shoulder of a country road to fix my car, after your perpetually reliable driver apparently took a wrong turn to another continent." Richard finally found his voice, though it was a strained, uncertain croak. "Mother, we didn't know. He arrived an hour late for dinner, and he's a mess." Matilda Prescott cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "A mess," she said, her eyebrows arching with a dangerous, ironic amusement. "This is not a mess, Richard. This is the mark of a man who is not afraid to do real work. A man who stops to help a stranger in need, even when it makes him late for a very important meeting." She then looked directly at her daughter. "A measure of character, Eleanor, that no amount of money or status can buy, and a quality that seems to be in desperately short supply in this household lately." She then turned her back on her stunned, horrified children and gave me her full, undivided attention. Her smile was now a thing of genuine warmth. "You have my deepest gratitude, young man," she said. "You possess a rare and valuable skill, and even rarer, the kindness to use it without asking for anything in return." She then did something that I believed sealed my in-law's fate. She took my arm, her grip surprisingly strong for her age, a clear, public gesture of alliance. "Come along, Mark," she said, her smile radiating a genuine delight. "It seems I have arrived just in time to save you from what I am sure was about to be a dreadfully boring and judgmental evening. You will join me for dinner." I walked, stunned and in a daze, up the steps of that grand mansion, not as a disgraced mechanic, but on the arm of the one woman who could make kings and CEOs tremble. The interrogation I had been dreading was over before it had even begun. But as I glanced back at the pale, horrified faces of Richard and Eleanor, I realized that a new, far more interesting, and for them, far more terrifying trial was just about to begin, and my angry in-laws were now the ones in the dock. I walked through the grand, imposing doorway of the Prescott mansion, not as a supplicant, not as a disgraced and tardy guest, but on the arm of the one woman whose authority in this house was absolute. The air inside was cool and smelled of beeswax, old money, and the faint, delicious aroma of a roasting duck. A tall, impossibly thin butler, who I later learned was named Henderson, stood in the vast marble foyer. He looked at my grease-stained hands and dirty suit with a flicker of professional horror, but his expression immediately smoothed into a mask of perfect neutrality when he saw my escort. "Matilda, you've returned," he said, his voice a low, respectful murmur. "Yes, Henderson," my new protector Matilda replied, her voice brisk and cheerful. "This is Mr. Mark O'Connell. Please set another place at the table, at my right hand."
The butler's eyes widened almost imperceptibly at the command. The seat to the right of the matriarch. It was the seat of honor, a place, I would later learn, that my own father-in-law-to-be, Richard, had coveted for years. We were followed into the house by the silent, shell-shocked remnants of the welcoming committee. Richard and Eleanor Prescott, who just moments ago had been the imperious lords of this castle, now trailed in our wake like chastened children. My girlfriend, Sophia, followed behind them, her face a beautiful, breathtaking picture of dawning awe and suppressed, joyous laughter. Matilda led me into the dining room. It was a room so grand it seemed almost absurd, with a table long enough to land a small aircraft on, set for what looked like 20 people, though only the 5 of us were present. She guided me to my seat of honor, and I sat, feeling like a commoner who had accidentally stumbled into a royal court and been mistaken for a visiting prince. The dinner that followed was the most surreal, the most satisfying, and the most terrifying 90 minutes of my entire life. It was not a meal. It was a performance, a quiet, brutal, and masterfully executed play with Matilda as the sole director and her own children as the hapless, humiliated supporting cast. She completely and totally ignored them. For the entire meal, her focus was a laser beam directed only at me. She did not ask me about my income or my family or my future financial prospects. She asked me about me. "So, Mark," she began, after the butler had poured us both a deep ruby red wine, "a 1960s silver cloud. A magnificent machine, but a notoriously temperamental one. The fuel pump, I'm told, is a nightmare. What's the secret to keeping the pressure consistent?" And so I told her. I spoke of my passion, of my craft. I talked about the elegant simplicity of a carburetor, the lost art of hand-tooling a custom part, the unique satisfaction of bringing a beautiful, forgotten old engine back to life. I spoke not as a greasy mechanic, but as an artisan, a craftsman, a man who truly loved his work. And she listened, her sharp, intelligent eyes never leaving my face, asking smart, insightful questions, her interest genuine and absolute. At one point, Richard, my future father-in-law, clearly unable to bear the irrelevance any longer, tried to interject. "Speaking of investments, Mother," he began, his voice a little too loud, "the market for pre-war classics is showing a significant downturn." Matilda cut him off with a cool, dismissive wave of her hand. "Richard, please," she said without even looking at him, "we are discussing things of actual, tangible value tonight, not your imaginary numbers on a screen. Mark is a man who builds things, a concept I fear is becoming quite foreign to this family." The verbal slap was so sharp, so precise, that Richard physically flinched and retreated into a sullen, resentful silence for the rest of the meal. Later, Eleanor, my future mother-in-law, made a desperate attempt to regain some ground. "The duck is simply divine, isn't it, Mother?
I had the shaft flown in from New York." Matilda took a delicate bite, chewed thoughtfully, and then looked at me. "It's quite good," she conceded. "But you know, Mark, a well-tuned engine, an engine that has been cared for and brought back from the brink by a skilled hand, that is a far more satisfying thing than any fancy meal. Don't you agree?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face as I finally understood the game she was playing. "I most certainly do."
And so it went. For the entire dinner, I was the celebrated guest, the valued expert, and they, in their own magnificent home, were the audience, forced to sit in silence and watch as the matriarch of their family celebrated the very man they had tried so cruelly to reject. Sophia, across the table, just watched me, her face full of a love and a pride so profound it made my own heart ache with a happy, brilliant light. She was seeing the man she fell in love with, not just accepted, but championed. As the evening finally came to a close and the butler served coffee, Matilda made her final, decisive move. She looked down the long table at her silent, humiliated children, and then at Sophia and me. "It has been a very long time," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an immense weight, "since I have had a conversation of such substance and integrity at this table. It gives an old woman hope for the future of this family." She then turned to me, a new, sharp, businesslike glint in her eyes. "Mark," she said, "my late husband, Sophia's grandfather, was a passionate collector of classic automobiles. His collection, which includes several priceless, one-of-a-kind vehicles, has been sitting in a climate-controlled garage on this property, untouched and slowly decaying for nearly 20 years. No one in this family has the skill or the interest to care for them." She leaned forward, her expression now one of a CEO making a formal offer. "I believe," she said, a triumphant smile on her face, "that I have just found a new project for you. We will discuss the generous terms of your new role as the official curator of the Prescott Automobile Collection tomorrow morning." My own jaw, I am not ashamed to say, dropped. Richard and Eleanor just stared, their faces a pale, horrified canvas of disbelief. She hadn't just approved of me. She hadn't just welcomed me into the family. She had just given me a job, a purpose within their own world, and the keys to a priceless piece of their history. The greasy mechanic they had tried to throw out of their house had just been put in charge of the family jewels. The silence in the grand dining room following Matilda Prescott's announcement was a thing of beauty. It was a silence filled not with tension, but with the deafening sound of my in-laws' world being turned completely and irrevocably upside down. I looked across the table at my girlfriend, Sophia. The look of pure, radiant, and triumphant love on her face was a sight I would cherish for the rest of my life. She wasn't just happy for me, she was vindicated. The man she loved, the man her parents had deemed a dirty, unpresentable commoner, had just been knighted by the Queen herself. My future father-in-law, Richard, looked as though he had been physically struck. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. My future mother-in-law, Eleanor, was a statue of pure, pale horror, her wineglass frozen halfway to her lips. They had lost. In their own home, at their own table, they had been utterly and completely outmaneuvered. Their judgment had been judged and found wanting. I finally found my voice, a humble and slightly shaky thing. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say. That is an incredibly generous offer. I would be honored." "Nonsense," she said, with a dismissive wave of her hand, though her eyes were twinkling with a fierce delight. "It is not a generous offer, Mark. It is a practical one. I am saving a priceless piece of my late husband's history from slowly turning to dust at the hands of people who see it only as a number in a ledger. You, I can tell, see the soul in the machinery. That is a skill that cannot be bought." As Sophia and I were finally preparing to leave hours later, after a long and wonderful conversation with Matilda about the glories of the 1930s Duesenberg engine, my in-laws made one last desperate stand. They cornered Matilda in the grand foyer. "Mother, you cannot be serious," Eleanor hissed, her voice a low, furious whisper. "You are not actually planning to give this grease monkey access to Father's collection. It's a priceless piece of our family's heritage." Matilda turned, and the warm, grandmotherly woman I had been speaking to all evening vanished, replaced by a figure of such cold, aristocratic authority that even I took an involuntary step back. "Eleanor," she said, her voice like ice, "let me be perfectly, crystal clear. This family's heritage is not in its cars, or its houses, or its stock portfolios. This family's heritage is supposed to be in its character, a quality this young man has displayed in abundance, and a quality you and your husband," she gave a withering glance at Richard, "have shown a shocking lack of tonight." She then turned to me. "Mark has my complete and total confidence. He is a man of skill, decency, and kindness. He is a welcome and much-needed addition to this family. You will show him the respect he has earned. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Mother," Eleanor whispered, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the floor. Matilda then smiled at me again. "Henderson will give you the keys to the west garage in the morning, Mark," she said. "Have fun." The months that followed were a quiet revolution. Our wedding was a beautiful, joyful affair. My in-laws were there, their smiles strained, but their behavior impeccably polite. They were terrified of Matilda, and it showed. The day after our honeymoon, I walked into the fabled West Garage for the first time, with Sophia at my side. It was a car lover's heaven, a dusty, silent cathedral of automotive greatness. There were pre-war Bugattis, classic Ferraris, ancient, magnificent American muscle cars. It was a lifetime of work, a project of pure joy. And it was now my responsibility, my purpose. I never had to pretend to be a man of automotive management again. In fact, Matilda insisted that I invite the in-laws to the garage, to walk them through my restoration work, to explain the intricate mechanics of a carburetor, to let them see me in my element, my hands covered in the honest, noble grease of my trade. It was her own quiet, sustained, and brilliant form of revenge on my behalf. One evening, months later, Sophia and I took one of the restored cars, a beautiful 1965 Jaguar E-Type, for a drive through the countryside. The sun was setting, the air was cool, and my beautiful wife was sitting beside me, a look of pure, happy contentment on her face. I thought back to that first terrible night, to the dread and the fear I had felt on my way to meet her parents. I had been so ready to hide who I was, to pretend to be someone more respectable to win their approval. And yet it was the one simple, authentic act of kindness, the act of a mechanic stopping to help a stranger with her car, that had won me everything. My vindication was not in their humiliation, but in the profound, beautiful truth of that moment. I had not been accepted in spite of who I was. I had been welcomed, celebrated, and ultimately triumphant because of it. I had been true to myself, and in doing so, had found a new and far better family, grease stains and all.
An absolutely perfect story about how true character is always more valuable than superficial status. What do you think of the way the matriarch, Matilda, put her own family in their place? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this amazing story of a test of character, please show your support by hitting that like button, and be sure to subscribe for more heartwarming stories of justice. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.